your original matrix X, for instance. And because we have several layers, you start from X, you process it, and you end up with something which is again T by 512, we can call X1. For the next stage, you will take X1 and do it again. That's why they fall back on their feet with these heads and 8 and 64, so that the dimensions roll and are always the same throughout the model. And they do something very simple. Then they say, my query is my initial sequence by my first projection. My keys are my sequence by my second projection, and my values by my third projection. Yeah. Knowing that it's the problem, it will be the task of the model to define these projections. Yeah. And there's an I index here, because that's for one head, but because H is 8, they have 8 such heads. So this will create the attention for one head. So every head has the following form. They take this query, which is the projection on a smaller space of X, dot the projection on X scales by square root of dk, softmax, and then multiply by the projection. So in every time it comes from X, but every time it's a different projection, a different space. So it gives you lots of flexibility actually to learn. And this is the head number I. And finally they concatenate all these heads, and because they have decided that every dimension will be the total dimension divided by the number of heads, this dimension is of the right size. For good measure, they reproject it with this linear operator that they have defined before, and that would be the multi-head, which in the end produces T annotations, or T hidden states, each being of dimension D model. Well, the dimension, in fact, is number of heads multiplied by the dimension of every head, but this has been constructed to fall back on D model. And we see that having T annotation, one for each word, is what we wanted in the first place.
But in the attention mechanism, essentially samples see different T indices, right?
Okay.
Because that's part of the self-attention. A word doesn't look just on it to itself; it looks.
No, for instance, here, when you have the query, it will take, for instance, only the specific word for the query. When you take the keys, it will take all of them. So it will say, it will compare, if you want. Let me get back a few slides. If you, in the case of the self-attention, basically this will come from X, and this will come from X as well. And then will be multiplied by X as well. But it will take from XT, compare XT with all the X's, will create T coefficients, multiply all these coefficients by all the words, and this will be the context vector for this specific T.
Because C, after summing, right, you have AC that is of fixed length essentially. Even though if you have many keys, it kind of gets at some point reduced to one vector of attention.
One vector only, but it's it's different at every time, because from 1 to 1.
Yeah.
In fact, this never changes. But when you do the calculation of attention, you will, even if it's self-attention, this and this will be different every time. Yeah. For instance, if my
you're not learning the attention vector, you're learning the attention function. So you learn the weights for the function, and then at each time step you get a different.
So AT is actually a variable. If I take the next sentence, the number of ATs would be.
In fact, the beauty of it is because the attention function calculates a dot product, for instance, between this and that.
Yeah.
So you have exactly as many dot products as you have annotations.
Yeah.
So when you have all the dot products, you softmax them, and it will always be the same length, and then you can weigh it, and then have your context vector.
Yeah.
But the beauty of it is that your attention function is always the same. As Carlos said, you learn the attention function, but it's super flexible, because whether you have 3 words or 50 words, you always learn it like one by one. And in fact, of course, it can be done in parallel through a matrix, but it's totally size agnostic. All right?
One question. This basically sets a set per sentence, or do you go adding words as per your paragraph continues?
No, just
You work on
your input is a sequence. Let me just go back to illustrate that better. Yeah, this is a sentence, essentially. Okay? So you have T words in the sentence. When you have your sentence, you start by, let's say it's a sentence in French. You calculate, you go with your first encoder, and you create your vectors, and then with your mechanism, you create all these annotations. If it's a French sentence, ma voiture est bleue, my car is blue, okay, ma voiture est bleue, right? You have a fixed set of annotations, one for ma, one for voiture, one for est, one for bleu. And they won't move, these ones. Then I will start to generate my car is blue. To do that, I start with my beginning of sentence. I will compare my beginning of sentence with ma, with voiture, with est, with blue. Everything will give me a little coefficient. These coefficients, I will softmax them. I will make the weighted average of ma voiture est bleu. It will give me some kind of vector. And this vector will be used in the next stage to produce ma. And then ma is a new internal state. I will take back with ma, and I will compare with my, sorry. I will compare my with na, my with voiture, my or my with my with bleu. We do the same thing again, and so on and so forth. So within that sentence, I will process it. So it's still sequential to produce the translation, because you have to be sequential for that part. But it's not sequential before, but there it has to be sequential to produce one word at a time. Does it?
Yeah, clear. Thank you. Like, when you go into the space of trying to understand the paragraph, like, does it have a memory on that sentence, or is always sentence by sentence?
My understanding is that at this stage, if you do it sentence by sentence, when you start with a new sentence, you've forgotten everything. So, it doesn't solve the problem of a long story where there's lots of cross references, but maybe you can apply that to a small paragraph as well. You know, I mean, there might be limitations for a full book, but maybe you can apply it for a full page or whatever.
So your dimension then is given by the amount of words in the sentence.
What dimension? Sorry.
The dimension.
The dimension of
T.
T is the dimension of the sentence. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is variable a sentence with T words. Small, if it's a paragraph, maybe if it's a page, maybe it will be, I don't know, 500 words, or usually with probably 30 words, I guess.
But the decoder doesn't have to produce the same length as the encoder, right? So the encoder creates something of the same length, but somewhere in the decoder that is somehow...
No, in fact, because remember the schema when we have the encoder, decoder, it starts from one context vector.
Yeah.
And here it's still the case, it starts with one context vector every time. The only progress, improvement, is that this context vector is different at every stage of the production, because you have a different query. But it's always one context vector.
Yeah.
So from that context vector, I will produce my car is blue, and then I will decide an end of sentence token to say, okay, that this is the end.